All right, we're live.
All right. Are we on the internet?
We are on the internet. I can't zoom in any.
That's okay.
And if anyone asks, anyone on Facebook or YouTube, yes, Becca's directly underneath the camera.
No.
If I can get two people to read this morning, someone should do that one, and then someone else to read 1 Kings 19, 1 through 9. Huh? Your favorite. Well, good morning, guys. How's it going? It's been a minute. So I think the very last class we had on Sunday morning, March of 2020, was with Tori. I think you were the last person to teach up here.
Really?
I think so.
I don't want to throw this world into chaos.
I think we can blame all of this directly on you.
No, the cat's moving.
Yeah. Well, that too. And then I think we had one Wednesday night class after that, and then we were gone.
Well, who taught that?
Janelle and I. So I'm glad we're all back. So as you can see, things are a little different as we're coming back. And those of you online, I don't know if anybody's watching, but if you are, it's a little different in here. We've got some spacing going on. We've got some hand sanitizer and all that good stuff. We have a couple of things to keep in mind. Like I said, if you're going to be joining us in person, don't forget to get your tags. That has not changed from the before times. And then we're going to ask everybody to start coming in through the back door instead of the side door. That way, if there's anyone sitting over there, we're not having a bunch of people pass in front of them. And then after service today, right, we're going to Twisties.
Yeah, Twisters.
Twisters. Twisties. Twizzlers?
It's up this.
I forgot what it was already.
It's just up the street on Safely and then McKellips.
Safely and McKellips. That's where we're going. There's ice cream and goodies and stuff like that.
And last time we were there, they had Dole Whip. So.
They had Dole. You know who else has Dole Whip that I discovered? QT.
Ah.
Certain QTs have Dole Whip. It is not as good as Disneyland's because it's not as creamy, but it's good. It's really good. But anyway, I'm really excited that we're back. The other thing that you guys will notice is that our classes are going to be a little shorter than we're used to because we have to dismiss out of here by 10:20, and we want to give you guys time to actually hang out and catch up and remember the good times. So we're going to do this new series that we're starting today. It's going to be a 4-week series. It's called Cut Them Some Slack. And I'm not going to take any credit for writing this because I didn't. Janelle wrote these lessons. I'm just teaching them. So if you hate that, if you love the class, I'm Gabriel and I taught this class and it's wonderful. If you hate it, Janelle wrote them. No, but anyway, in this mini-series, we're going to take another look at some of the Bible's most looked down upon moments. Moments where over the years we've been taught to sort of disparage the people involved in those stories because of their reactions, even though they're very human reactions. And we hope that in the process of kind of reframing these stories, we can also reconnect. I mean, we've all just come off of this crazy, 18 months or so. And on the other side of it, we've all come out changed in some way or another. And it's time for us to sort of figure out what kind of lessons we learned over this time period, whether you were cooped up at home or whether you had to go out to work or had to deal with difficulties, both personal, political, familial. And so we're going to touch on some mindsets that we might have experienced during this time, navigating through the pandemic and the situation. And I know that the degree of feeling safe during the pandemic was different for each person. We all had our own risk assessments and calculations that we made. And so for this reason, we're not going to hear any opinions on necessarily who did right or who did wrong, or who was not more responsible. But instead, we want to create a space to share those experiences, the fears that we faced, the strengths that we found, the lessons we learned. And so we want to reevaluate and reconnect because we will know how to better support each other moving forward once we do that. So we're going to start our lesson today with looking at the disciples when they are presumably at their very, very worst. And that is right after Jesus' death. We got 3 days, right, where Jesus is dead, he's been buried, and the disciples are kind of stuck in this limbo where they feel lost. And then we will transition back to the Old Testament, and we're going to look at Elijah, when he is at his most defeated after Jezebel promises to kill him. And we're going to call that situation in the field. So, before we start this dissection of the disciple situation, I want to know, what are the sort of traditional opinions and takeaways of the state of Jesus' closest followers when right after the death of Jesus? What have you been taught to think about how they behaved after Jesus died? Cowardly. Okay. What else? What have you been taught to believe about that, or examine it? That they're human. Okay.
That they almost just gave up everything they believed in. They just kind of went back to what they knew from before.
That they gave up. That's really a really good one. Anyone else? So, we've been taught, we've heard, and we've learned that this is where the disciples' faith failed. That was it. Jesus died, and they went and they hid away. So how could Jesus' closest friends lose faith so quickly after he was gone? I mean, why were they hiding after Jesus taught them and showed them miracles and miraculous signs? And Jesus taught them, the disciples, even how to do certain things that were miraculous and extraordinary. How could they hide? So it's easy to look back on these men and their decisions and judge their weaknesses. But let's take a look at what we've just gone through and what we've just experienced, right? We've been faced with a situation that made us question our actions, made us question our motives in one way or another. So I think it's time to take a closer look at how these 11 men who devoted themselves to Jesus, what this really all means. So, if we could have somebody read John chapter 20, verses 19 through 20, and then skip ahead to 26 to 29.
So when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his side. The disciples then rejoiced when they saw the Lord. After 8 days, the disciples were again inside, and Thomas was with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Reach here with your finger and see my hands, and reach here with your hand and put it in my side. And do not be unbelieving, but be believing." Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe."
Okay, so the disciples are hiding away, right? And it has been 3 days, roughly, since the Lord died, been crucified. And John here, John makes a very interesting point that you actually don't really get to read in some of the other Gospels. John makes a point of highlighting how the door was closed and locked. He does it twice. First in verse 19, and then again in verse 26. He makes that point to let us know that the disciples are staying behind this locked and closed door. And that's what I want to reevaluate. That's what I want to look at. It's a really important detail. But I think we often misconstrue its role in the story. We look at this, right, and judge the disciples for laying low, for fearing the Jewish leaders, for hiding away, for being scared. We scoff at them for the locked door. But if you pay attention to Jesus' words, he doesn't reprimand them for that. Like, let's be clear. Jesus does reprimand them for their lack of faith. But that's about it. So across John and Mark's retelling, so in Mark, he only rebukes the disciples for the doubts that enter their minds about him appearing after the resurrection. He doesn't say that their fear and their caution were sins. Jesus does not reprimand the disciples for being careful. He does not reprimand them for hiding away. He doesn't do that. The only thing that Jesus holds against them is that they doubted that he was even there. So, why does John mention the locked door twice in his account? Why is that important? Well, because it demonstrates to the disciples, it demonstrates to us the power of Jesus' return to them. Because not only does he appear to them once, but he appears to them twice behind a bolted door. I'm sure if the disciples had gone, when Jesus appeared and they had gone over to the door, they would have found that it was still locked. They would have found that nobody else could have gotten in. So, more importantly then, why do we accuse the disciples of hiding? Why is it that we find in ourselves that makes us look at the situation and say that they were weak? Because they're reacting in human nature. Like, put yourself in their shoes for a second, right? Their best friend and companion, a miraculous being, has died. And not only that, one of their own other companions, another best friend, close companion, was not only responsible for the betrayal that led to that death, but he himself took his own life. If you're in those shoes, if you're in that moment, you lost two of your closest friends to political machinations, to betrayal, and to suicide. Are you in a position to go and see people? To go out and be part of society in the way that you normally are? No. You're not. They have trust issues at this point. They have some serious trust issues. Not just with the Jewish leaders, not just with the public, but even within themselves, amongst each other. There's a lot to unpack here. So why does this detail matter? Why does this locked door matter so much? Well, I think it's very telling about our cultural expectations on what it means to be strong, to have strong faith. The general idea, then, of our cultural understanding is that to display strength and to display faith, that we have to act. We have to do something. We have to show off that we're strong. We have to show off that we're fine. It's a very individualistic thought. But we're in a very individualistic society. Right? But it's a very individualistic thought for people who profess to believe in Jesus and to believe that we have to let Christ work through us. So, nevertheless, the pandemic had us comparing ourselves to this story. Made us worry others would think that our faith was weak, that I wasn't acting as boldly as I should in the face of danger. But this detail of the locked door is essential to this story because it highlights Jesus' power to reach people and to work with people even in their most challenging and troubling times. And he does it all while extending grace, while giving us the grace and the space to do what we need to do. So maybe we need to extend that grace to ourselves. Maybe we need to extend that grace to each other. Vulnerability is not sin. Being vulnerable is not a sin. Failure to believe that Christ can work through locked doors, that is. So, I'm not suggesting that it is wrong to soldier on in times of uncertainty. And such an act comes with its own human struggles. So, we're going to go back now and take a look at Elijah and see him in a very vulnerable part of his life that he spent as a prophet, and a point at which he feels isolated and completely drained of his zeal. So most of us know the story of Elijah, proving that the God of Israel is the one and only God over Jezebel and the priests of Baal. And that's in 1 Kings chapter 18. But you'll notice we're not going there. We're going to 1 Kings chapter 19. It is a really epic moment of triumph for God, for Elijah. It's intense. Lots of people die. It's crazy. And we admire Elijah for his actions. Right up until chapter 19. Like, Elijah is cool. He's a hero. We look up to him. He did the thing. Brought the fire down. It was awesome. But then in the next chapter, what does he do? He runs. He runs and hides in the wilderness. And I'm not sure if we make as many assumptions about Elijah's weakness or cowardice here as we do with the disciples. It's probably not at the same level. But I think that's because we kind of tend to overlook it. Since, right in chapter 18, it's such a strong showing of strength and victory that this episode in Elijah's life probably gets swept under the rug a little bit. But I do remember learning about this moment under a negative lens. So, if I could have somebody else read 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 9.
Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid, and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night.
So the judgment Elijah receives at this moment is mostly the same as what the disciples received in that same moment of anguish. Right? How could he run away after God shows how mighty he is? Right? That's the way that we might be able to see it. Why does Elijah run away? Why does he lose that strength to keep moving forward? Why is the prophet of God pouting and feeling sorry for himself? Why is he afraid? You might even compare it to Jonah, but the difference is that Jonah didn't actually do what God said. Elijah did. So it's easy to levy those accusations at Elijah from the glimpse of this moment. But guess what? God doesn't. God does not pass judgment on Elijah the way we do. Instead, he listens to Elijah's honesty and his grief. So, what do you think Elijah's feeling at that moment? And that's a question I'm asking you.
Sounds depressed.
He's depressed. Any other thoughts? What do you think Elijah's feeling? Shame.
Exhausted.
Exhausted. Yeah.
He's uncomfortable
Very uncomfortable.
and uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah, he might definitely be feeling incompetent. So,
Did you say unconfident?
No, I said unconfident.
unconfident. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Unconfident.
Unconfident.
All those
That's
other
true.
things too.
Yes. So here's a few things that we need to remember about Elijah's experience. He's been living on the run during a drought, right? There's no water anywhere. Lots of people are dying of famine. 3 years have passed from the start of that drought to the moment he goes against Jezebel again. Jezebel has killed many of the Lord's prophets, and she's after Elijah directly. And this man is tired, and he's isolated. He's alone. And he states, "I have had enough, Lord." God responds, not with judgment, not with, "No, get up and keep going." He responds with comfort. What does God do for him? He feeds him, right? He sends an angel to take care of him, right? Sends an angel to feed him, gives him comfort, gives him food to strengthen him. The angel acknowledges that he needs to eat more because the journey is too strenuous for him. So I'm sure that it became isolating for those of us who were, quote, in the field during this time. It probably became exhausting. And perhaps even with the excitement of things kind of opening up again, of us being able to have class in person, doing activities in person again, some of you might be carrying those feelings. How many of us have shared Elijah's sentiment in the past year? Like, I have had enough, Lord, of this. of doing all of this. But like Elijah, God very well might be about to comfort us, right? And not just with food. Just a couple of verses later, God reveals the rest of his plan to Elijah. We're not going to read it this morning, but he reveals the rest of his plan to Elijah. God is about to re-reveal himself to the people. He's going to have a big show of force so that his people can see that he is there. And he is appointing his new anointed help. And Elijah will set it into motion. That's the plan. Not only does God reveal this to Elijah later on in 1 Kings, but he also encourages him with the knowledge that he's not the only one left. He's lonely now, but God has reserved 7,000 other faithful followers to help him. They might be scattered. They might be scared. They might be lonely. They may have had enough. But God is in control. So, from this event, it becomes clear that a transition was coming. This 3 years of drought, not sustainable. Jezebel's campaign against the Jewish people, not sustainable. None of that was sustainable. There's no way that was going to continue. God was not going to allow it to go any further. He was going to change things up for his people again, like he does many times throughout the Old Testament, the way he does through Jesus in the New Testament, and the way he does for us today. Things are changing again. And the shift that we can see in the story of Elijah is similar to what we're facing. God is bringing us together again after a struggle. Here we are. If we felt guilt, now we can feel joy. If we felt exhaustion, we can find comfort in the knowledge that he's about to do something and we're going to be a part of it. So, next week, our topic is things unseen. We're going to continue to examine biblical movements we look down on or misinterpret. And we're going to remind ourselves that we often only see recorded glimpses into the lives of those featured in the Bible. And that sometimes first impressions aren't always the end-all, be-all to these people's stories. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
friend. One thing to sleep